comics are continually identifying and filling in the gaps in our media that major publications have, especially when it comes to identity politics.
I remember once I did a gig in Cambridge, and this woman come up to me and she goes to me, I just need to tell you, like, you doing this makes Muslims seem less scary. I find that when I do my stand-up, I have to address the Muslim aspect straight away because I'm visibly Muslim.
I've never seen a right-wing crowd, and I would love to be honest. So all the PC or liberal crowd that I've seen were very resistant at the beginning to laugh at personal refugee stories.
I don't think I think as far about stuff. I just do whatever I think is funny.
So if you're a comedian, you have to be doing funny stuff. If I post something about Islamophobia, I will lose followers like that.
I think comedy is at the front line of, well, as we'll be talking about today, it's at the front line of social change and what and how you can talk about things. And so by writing about comedy, you get to engage with super interesting cultural fault lines.
If we're talking about identity politics in Britain, most of the major cultural institutions were run by a very narrow social and political elite until kind of well into the 1950s. And it was only in the second half of the 20th century whereby alternative perspectives emerged into the public sphere.
I think that there's sometimes maybe a pressure, or some comedians feel a pressure to be like a social commentator, when, I guess that's not the central role of their job as a comedian.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm just kind of a little bit suspicious of this sort of urge for everyone, right, regardless of what they actually want or their own desires, to sort of have a stab at the mainstream. There are people who kind of want to retain this level of oppositional antagonism towards, I guess, all establishments, and I think that should be nurtured too. And I feel like what's the real problem is the material conditions don't support that ecosystem that's outside the mainstream. And I feel like if we tackle the material conditions, then that mainstream, then that sort of the mainstream wouldn't be somewhere that we all have to inhabitate to get some kind of sustenance.
Good morning, everybody, and welcome back to the third and final day of the Pop Culture Meets Social Change retreat. Thank you very much for everyone who's been with us for the last 2 days, and welcome to all the people who are joining us afresh for this final day on games. Don't adjust your sets. I'm not Joe Glanville. Unfortunately, Joe's having some issues with internet. My name's Ian Dodgen, and I'm director of Ochre. For those who don't know, Ochre is a global cross-sector network for collaboration, and by all means, please do follow us at Ochre Social on the usual places and find out more about our work. We've just seen a wonderful visual response and summary of the previous day of the retreat, composed by Muhammad Ali. Muhammad is an award-winning artist and curator. He's the founder and artistic director of Soul City Arts in Birmingham. Do check them out. They're an incredible organisation. You can see them, find out more at soulcityarts.com. We've had an amazing 2 days so far. Yesterday, of course, our focus was comedy. We've had some incredible and inspiring talks, some workshops and events. There was an incredible stand-up event last night. You don't need to take my word for it about the talks. You can check them out and recordings in the arena, and there's a button at the top of the screen. Don't do that right now, but later you can watch them back on those recordings. For me, one of the real highlights was actually later on in the day in conversation around one of the tables in the lounge, as everyone was reflecting on the discussions during the day. And if you get an opportunity, do visit the lounge later this afternoon. You never know who you'll bump into and who you might be inspired by. But today we're on games. Now, interactive entertainment and working with the interactive entertainment industries is a big part of Ochre's work. So it's an absolute delight to bring you this day. We have some amazing speakers and fantastic events going on today. So without further ado, to lead us through the day, it is an absolute joy to hand over to the incredible presenter, journalist, podcast host, Shay Thompson.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much, Ian, for that lovely introduction. You did me justice. Thank you. I really appreciate it. So yeah, just reiterating what you said, I just want to welcome everyone to today's gaming day, and thank you in particular to Oka for curating the day. If you aren't aware, Oka are a new global charity that, are advancing collaboration between the entertainment, social impact, and research sectors. As you might imagine, they work a lot with the games industry and have helped with the development on titles like Hellblade: Senua's Sacrifice, which is a title in which a girl is dealing with psychosis after the death of her lover. Astrologaster, which is a narrative game that kind of focuses on medical quandaries. It's pretty hilarious. You should check it out. And more recently, Alba: A Wildlife Adventure. If you aren't already, I would, like Ian said, encourage you to follow Oka on social media. The handle is at Oka Social on Twitter and Instagram. So yeah, as you might imagine, the theme of the day is social impact via games. Games culture and games themselves can absolutely be a tool for beautiful, inspiring stories that reflect our society in the same way that other pieces of media would. I think for a lot of people, they think of games, they thought of, things like Call of Duty and FIFA, which, are important games and make up the fabric of what gaming is. But, it really is this powerful tool to tell stories that, you wouldn't necessarily expect from this medium. So yeah, on this theme, we have an entire day of really uplifting talks, panels, workshops, videos. I hope those of you who might not be the most familiar with games will feel enveloped in everything that this weird and wonderful world has to offer. And for those of you who know games like the back of your hand, you're bound to learn things that will surprise and educate you. So yeah, as I mentioned, we're kicking off the day with a series of talks, and starting us off, we have Maleth Abbas, who is an indie games developer based in Dundee, who will be discussing his process of creating his game, Hope, which depicts the experiences of refugees in the UK. I hope I'm able to hand over to you, Mal, if that's all right.
Hi there, can you hear me? Hello.
Yes, I can. It's all your.
Hi. Brilliant. Thank you so much, Shay. Thanks for the wonderful introduction. I'm going to just try and share my screen. Hopefully this works. So you should be able to see my screen right now. Is that right? Can you see my screen?
Yeah, we can. Loud and clear. Or visually clear. Go for it, Mal.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you. So yeah, hi everyone. I am Maleth Abbas from Biome Collective, as Shay said, from Dundee at the moment. So I'll just take you through my slides. So this is where I'm actually from, and I'll come back to this. And I actually grew up mostly in Liverpool with all my schooling and education there. And I've been working in Dundee in Scotland for the past decade or so, 10 years or so. And Dundee is really special because it's a very small city, and it's very collaborative, and it has a heritage of creative industries like comics, games, and all jute and jam and all that kind of good stuff. So it's a really inspiring place. So I was able to set up my own creative studio called Biome Collective that focuses on games, art, culture, and space. And essentially, we're here to be very experimental in the games world and also be kind of very open to collaborations. So we were primarily a kind of co-working space. What's really important about this is the fact that we were mixed in with people outside of games and in the broader creative industries. And we do events like game jams, etc. And we also invite people in outside of games. So this, for example, is Scottish Dance Theatre hanging out with us playing games. And we do these lab days where we spend time with other industries, which is really kind of collaborative and fun and leads to good projects. We do events like festivals, etc. We also do very experimental work where we light up buildings and make them interactive. This is V&A Dundee. So in about 6 years, we managed to get a really strong list of collaborators, mostly in Scotland and internationally, and we've exhibited around the world. Our portfolio is quite diverse, which I'm really proud of. But we do make video games, and I am here to talk about video games primarily. When I say video games, I mean things like this. This is Spiel, and Spiel is an interactive installation that uses games design methodologies to essentially allow young people to start a conversation about mental health. So I mean games in the sense of installations like this. Here's the actual experience in action. This was at London Design Biennale at Somerset House in 2018. But I also mean kind of traditional games. So we do lots of children's games for websites with various different partners. And we're probably more famous for a project called Killbox, and I'll share about that now. Killbox really was a project instigated by Joseph Delap, who's a contemporary artist based in America at the time. He's actually part of Biome Collective now in Dundee. But Killbox was a very successful project, and which tackled a really interesting subject matter, drone warfare. So in the game, you play a pilot, but then you watch a village. But we flip it on the player, and you also play a child within that village. So you can imagine where the story goes. And what was really interesting about Killbox as an interactive installation in physical spaces was that I had the pleasure to really go around the world displaying the project at various different festivals and events. And what was really challenging for me as a person of color was Killbox is set in North Pakistan, and quite often the team makeup was myself and three other individuals who were white. And quite often people would come to me and say, "Oh, is this about you? Is this your story?" Assuming that I was from North Pakistan, or Pakistan, for example, which is not the case. So in a way, this really emphasized for me the need for me to express my own story about my own heritage. And that really was the starting point of this project called Hope. So really, Hope is about me and my heritage. And I'm from Iraq, and I came to the UK with my family as a child, as a family of refugees after the first Gulf War. And what was, that was already challenging in its own right, coming from Baghdad and living first in South Wales. But what was really challenging for me was the perception of my homeland to the people in the UK, and having to deal with that and everyday racism as I kind of grew up. But ultimately, I really wanted to explore something that was hopeful, that had a positive message, but also elaborated on the challenges of being a person of color, being a refugee, living in a land away from home or your new home. And so I came up with the project of Hope, and it's really kind of, it combines puzzle, story, that's kind of the concept of it, and it's really about exploring the hate of the other, clashes of culture, and how hope can lead to a better future. In a kind of game sense, the best way to describe it, if anyone's played these games, is kind of almost like the challenging narrative of Papers, Please, which is a wonderful game, but also the playful and accessibility of something like Windowser, which is quite an old school Flash game now. So in terms of my process, with my creative producer hat on, I realized I wanted to do this project, and so I inquired about funding opportunities, and I was able to get lucky on the third attempt. So I actually applied for funding from Creative Scotland, specifically to a fund that would be aimed at people who are from unrepresented backgrounds in the arts. And I actually applied, and I didn't get the fund. I also applied to the UK Game Fund, and to be honest with you, I applied knowing that it was a long shot because the business case wasn't very strong. But thankfully, on the second attempt at trying with the arts funding, I managed to secure some grant funding to start the project. And what's really important to me and what's really fun is that I get to explore really interesting aesthetics. So I'm exploring what I'm calling, or what's referred to as Middle East futurism. And I've got this really quote that I found quite moving that I'll just read out for you guys. Notions of belonging are constantly challenged. There is no homogeneous culture or identity. The use of futurism here is not intended to reference futurism as a movement. Neither is it explicit reference to the futuristic. Instead, futurism is anticipating a future. It signifies a defiant cultural break, a projection forward into what is beyond ongoing Eurocentric hegemonic narratives. These ideas can contribute to a growing counterculture of thought and action, and through time will be found and used in a construction of alternative states of becoming. I found that a really powerful statement there by Suleiman Mijeli, which was really inspiring. And so with that in mind, I've started to kind of explore what this could be in terms of aesthetics, and coming from the Middle East myself with a passion for Far East culture as well. I've kind of explored the possibilities of where I'd like to go in terms of art direction, also including architecture, lots of Middle Eastern and Islamic inspired art, calligraphy, obviously. And this is all just, research, these are essentially mood boards, research material that I've been carrying out. And what's really important to me is that I honestly feel these are very beautiful, thought-provoking visuals that are very universal, but quite frankly are very unrepresented in what we see in games and culture, broadly speaking. So I'd like to kind of help bridge that gap. Now, the reality is that creating art or a piece of game with lived-in experience is incredibly challenging. And I guess, I'm kind of here to share a little about that, the kind of challenges about this. And in fact, I might just, I'm happy to end the slideshow there and just, I think you should be able to see my face. I'll just put last, I think I've got 2 minutes. I'll maybe just share about, what it is like, actually sharing something that's very personal to me in a very public way. It's very, very challenging, and to be honest with you, it's been an incredible struggle to get the right tone and also to kind of find the right partners to work with on this project. But it's certainly been a fascinating journey so far through my research. I've actually got a stack of books I've got to read, but in a way I've kind of also been keeping it at bay because it's quite a personal piece of work. And it's, being in the public eye as a refugee is incredibly challenging. And the reality of lived experience is that you are in the moment. It's not like it's the past and I'm happy to share it. And, what is done is done. I am living this every day, me, myself, my immediate family who have also settled in the UK, but also my broader family who live in the Middle East and other places, who've settled as refugees elsewhere, who are currently refugees themselves, waiting for sanctuary. So it makes it very, very incredibly challenging in that regard, how you navigate what's primarily seen as a form of entertainment into something that's a bit more thought-provoking, that's a bit more challenging. That's where I'm at. I mean, I'm on this journey. I'd love to get feedback from people. I'm kind of reaching out for anyone who has lived experience of being a refugee to kind of share your story with me. I'd love to kind of connect with people. And in terms of, I am passionate about games as a medium. And I think if anyone here in the crowd is kind of new to games or would love to explore games, I would just say to you that it's a wonderful medium to kind of explore really interesting subject matter. And it's incredibly accessible, especially to younger people. I think I'll just end there. So I think I am part of a panel later on today. So I'm sure there might be some Q&A opportunities. I'm happy to kind of answer anything that comes up. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that, Mal. I was going to ask, actually, if anybody had any questions, if you're free to take some questions right now.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Does anyone have any questions based on that? And it's so, just as a little personal thing, it's so incredible to kind of hear your story kind of come together in this way, because we've only met like the one time when we were we were both part of the collective ensemble in 2019, and kind of hearing the budding process from that aspect was to see it all kind of come together in this way is really, really cool.
Thank you, Shay. Thank you.
No worries. Seeing if there's any questions. Happy to stick around. Raised hands, not just yet. I don't think so. So
no problem.
Yeah, no. Oh, wait, one just came in at the very end.
Sure.
So do you have any tips for someone sharing a personal story, I guess through the medium of games or any other medium, really?
Yeah, of course. I think you got to look within. You got to really kind of understand your story and really be able to express yourself. I think I'm incredibly privileged in the sense that through arts funding, I'm able to really use it as an opportunity to tell whatever story I want in whatever format I like. So my definition of game is very, very, very diverse. It could be anything really. So I'm open to that. And I think really find like-minded people who are willing to kind of work with you. And Certainly for me, what's helped is speaking to my family, speaking to my sister who's gone through the same experience as myself, my parents who've kind of been part of that story. That has been very inspiring, and making sure they're on board, because it's not just my story. It's a story of more people than just me. It's not just about me, really. So consider it a collective story.
Totally. What is the timeline for creating a game like this? I think that's a particularly interesting question. I was thinking about this the other day. Compared to like other mediums, we don't really have a lot of like making ofs. So I think it'd be good to have some insight into, what does the timeline look for something like this?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think it's really about scope and opportunity and budget. But in this instance, it's quite a small project, to be honest with you. So if I was doing this full time, it would probably be 6 to 8 months maximum, but I'm actually doing it over time. And so with the Killbox, for example, was a collaboration between 4 people with a small amount of arts funding, so similar to this. And we did it over 18 months, but it was part-time, so it was 18 months, but the actual time itself was probably 5 to 6 months for that project, but we spread it over 18 months.
Awesome stuff. And lastly, what are the specific challenges you're facing with telling the story in the games medium? Is it the medium itself or like the interactions? That was the last question.
I think as a games designer, I'm driven by the audience. And I think the audience both excites me in terms of I'd like to share with them, but also scares me in terms of if I'm opening up about something very personal. The audience is both a motivator and a bit of a stumbling block at the same time. But that is just the kind of my own personal creative process that I have to kind of come to terms with.
We just have one question from Mohammed, who's on.
Hi there. Hi, Mana. Thanks for sharing. I'm curious. It's more of a personal interest because I'm a games designer from about 20 years ago. I was during PlayStation 1 days. And just to mark the moment in time, it was when I remember in the game studio where I worked, we were watching the 9/11 Twin Towers come down on the TV screen in this game studio. Quite a surreal moment I remember vividly. And at that moment, if you could just help clarify, just to give us hope, I suppose, as well, that I left the industry out of frustration of I suppose that feeling of the social value of games and dealing with some of the issues of society and faith and Islamophobia. What is there hope? Is there this kind of a critical mass that you see that could be building? In my time 20 years ago, I felt like I was drowning. I thought it's a lost cause right now because people are interested in GTA, etc. Can you give us a bit of a timeline of when things started to change, or what were the earliest games that have been the ones that have opened up a new world where social conscious gaming and politics, etc., is building, and is there hope? Is my question is what I'm asking.
Sure, thank you, Mohammed. Yeah, great question. I'll try and keep it brief. I guess ultimately, I think there's always been, games aren't bad. There's not this kind of agenda to be bad. I think there's always been this thread about, or a positive thread about this kind of international reality that we all live in, right? We're one people, one planet, all that kind of stuff. And I guess for me, from my experience as a games player, we're seeing a lot of, especially stuff from Japan that would come across, stuff from Japan that would actually explore other areas around the world. So there'd be kind of Middle Eastern stuff more likely to appear in Japanese stuff, which I find quite fascinating. I think when I played Metal Gear Solid 1 on PlayStation, there's a character called Sniper Wolf who's actually within the game from Kurdistan, right? Now, none of my friends at the time knew where that was. I knew that was part of it. That was part of Iraq. And that was such a weird thing for me to go, they're referencing where I'm from, which was quite strange for me. So in a sense, I think that it's always been there. However, I think naturally with the rise of the indie scene, with more diverse people making games, there's been this natural shift to just more interesting stories being told, more challenging stories being told. And I think over the past 10 years, that's been the case. And this kind of, the hope I have is that this is continuing. More people are able to make games now. You don't have to be that technical. We can see what's happening with Dreams, a game that's also a game-making platform, for example. Like, I'm seeing things coming out of that that's absolutely incredible. So imagine what's going to be happening in 10 years' time, right? In 20 years' time. And I think naturally, as a society, the planet is getting smaller. You know, through technology, we are realizing we are one people. And so we're coming to terms of that. We're coming to terms with the fact that we're one people, but also we're very different. And that's actually awesome. We need to celebrate that. So I think that's why I'm quite hopeful. And I think my faith plays a big part of that as well, actually.
I was going to say hope is the big theme here. Is like, even as we were talking about it, like thinking about how far games have come is, it's pretty inspirational, and I cannot wait to see what comes from the future, which is something we'll be touching on in our panel later on. I also just want to apologize. There is a helicopter circling outside. Joys are living in London. So thank you once again, Mal, for your time, and I will be speaking to you soon. So just to introduce our next incredible speaker, we will hear from Tara Mustafa, who is a seasoned producer and game designer who has shipped over 10 titles in 15 years. She's here to share her journey of founding Code Coven, an online community for marginalized developers. Take it away, Tara.
Oh gosh, thank you. Can you hear me all right? Great. How am I supposed to follow that, Mal? That was incredible, and I love the question that Mohammed asked. So yeah, I'm going to do the whole screen share thing, and hopefully you all can see my screen share and not my notes. Can you give me a blue heart emoji if that's the case? Thank you. So yeah, hi everyone. My name is Tara Mustafa. My pronouns are she, her. And I am a British, Canadian, Bruneian, mixed race game designer, Muslim game designer. And I am the CEO and founder of Code Coven, which is the first global games industry accelerator for underrepresented talent. I'd like to welcome you to my thoughts, if you will, on building an inclusive games industry and the wonderful results that can come from it, which Mal has actually already alluded to. So the first question I would like to ask is, how many of you consider yourselves gamers? Can you give me a thumbs up emote if you do? That's quite a few, okay. And how many of you have the crossword puzzle or Sudoku, chess, Candy Crush, Fantasy Premier League, or some sort of game on your phone? If you want to give me more thumbs ups? There's quite a few more. So in that case, I have to break it to you, you're all gamers. So as Shay said, I've been a game developer for over 16 years, and I have a passion for games because of the powerful storytelling potential. Unlike any other medium, games gives you agency. It gives you a great opportunity for empathy. And as a designer, you get to provoke a player into feeling and thinking. In most games, you're making hundreds of choices per second in controlling your character, for example, and coordinating your controller just to facilitate that. You know, look at all these choices in this short Mario GIF. You have to decide how fast Mario is going to run, how high he's going to jump, how much time is on the timer before it counts down, what the value of coins are. There's millions of decisions, and as a player, you're choosing when and what to do and how to execute that. In World of Warcraft, which is another game I'd like to reference, which was launched in 2004, millions of people, 12 million, were simultaneously taught how to coordinate 40 people around the world in order to overcome an obstacle in their raids, for example, and they had to work together as a team, each with different roles of healing or tanking or doing damage. And that has implications on a social level of a whole generation that was already prepared in a way for remote work and agile teamwork. And funnily enough, there was an accidental bug in the game that actually simulated the pandemic back in 2005. And it was used for case studies by leading researchers and is still actually being referenced today. And in Call of Duty Modern Warfare, which was one of the games that reignited my passion for design, we were given the opportunity to empathize with people in the military who had the difficulty and psychological impact of not being able to differentiate between friendlies and hostiles in a thermal imaging bombing mission. The other perspective of what Mal had talked about earlier. Then we have in kind words, we're, as you saw in the videos, enabled to anonymously connect and care for people in a community through our own act of mindfulness and self-care. In Spiritfarer, we're taught to mourn through a kind, gentle, and loving game. The list goes on. Games are such a powerful medium for empathy, skill development, and storytelling. But unfortunately, they've been largely labeled as things like toxic, violent, misogynistic. That list goes on too. So what does this have to do with building a safe space for marginalized developers? This is a little snapshot of the industry, and a little bit of extra information, as Mohammed had also alluded to, is that a large portion of folks who identify as marginalized leave the industry after 5 years. So there's very little representation on senior levels. You can see here 71% of the industry are male, and over 89% identify as also Caucasian. So that is the majority. And that's something that we all know and we've talked about actually throughout this whole retreat is through media, we need to allow for a diverse gaze. It allows for richer content experience and removes the under from underrepresented. And so that's what we're here to change with Code Coven. I founded Code Coven in 2019 with the mission to move the needle and change the systems in place that weren't allowing for diversity at all levels. For me, it wasn't only about getting diverse people in the door, but giving them a path in career advancement and mentorship. So to do that, I realized that I needed to build a whole system that deconstructed the crunch culture and the valued characteristics of like a team player rather than what was known as the rock star ninja coder that they needed, or the creditocracy that the industry is built upon. I've known people who've worked in the games industry for 10 years and haven't shipped a game or gotten a credit because their projects kept on getting cancelled. But it wasn't to say that they were a bad designer or engineer or anything like that. So we needed to redefine the value. So at Code Coven, we built an all-encompassing career program with heart-based training in mind and created a safe space where marginalized folks weren't the minority in order to help them feel supported in challenging the current norms. So how did I do this? The first thing I looked at was finding a team that mirrored our values, and I was very lucky in finding such amazing people. Just to say that the experience is actually out there. We are uniquely positioned to educate and mentor people from marginalized groups. Our team are all underrepresented game developers with diverse experience across the industry, from indie to AAA blockbusters. And it's with this team that we decided that we needed to take a three-pronged approach to achieve parity in the games industry. So the first thing I'd like to talk about is our academy. I love this slide. Through our academy, we offer online courses for marginalized people in intimate class settings, capped at 13 students because we like to lean into the whole Coven thing, in order to be able to give our students the personal attention that they need and adapt our courses to be able to meet their needs. The courses consist of lectures, lab time, and independent and collaborative projects. And our introductory courses are to reduce the barriers to entry for aspiring game makers and create that path for consumers to convert into creators. And there's so many wonderful tools out there, like we brought up as well earlier, Dreams, Roblox, Minecraft even. There's just so many tools. It's really wonderful to be able to open those doors. Highlighted here are just a few of the games that our students made in 2020. So they were games that focused on self-care and overcoming your fears and kindness, and had representation in their characters, as you can see. So while Code Coven has a focus on game development, our students come from diverse disciplines and often explore additional use cases for utilizing the game engines beyond games. As an example, one of our students was a visual artist who created a real-world art installation using a game engine to track when people entered a daydream state. It's really, really fascinating and amazing stuff. And the second thing that we're also doing in our three-pronged approach is accelerators. Through our accelerator, we support underrepresented developers at various stages of their careers. Last year, we launched the summer program, which was an incubator-style internship for university students and recent graduates whose career opportunities had been cancelled due to the pandemic. We banded together multidisciplinary teams from around the world to create games from concept to completion, and simulated the entire game dev process from pre-production to launch in order to help them with that robust portfolio piece that would help them get their first job in the games industry. So these are the few of the games that our participants made last year, and they were the games that told diverse stories, like a queer relationship, a road trip between ex-partners on a road trip. And we brought together developers from Wisconsin to Jamaica to the UK to South Africa, and who wouldn't have had the choice or the chance to work together before. So through this program, we had guest presentations and mentorship from our strong mentor network, and encouraged the network potential for each individual person to directly connect them with at least six industry professionals, opening up all of those doors to advance their careers for them and be supported by people who were like-minded and in that network. And then further to that, through our Elevate program, we supported established indie studios with progressing their projects to become pitch ready or publishable through that accelerator, to be able to give them the funding that they needed. So, we've tried to cover the entry, we've tried to cover the sort of the initial getting your foot in the door at Code Coven, and then getting funding to enable your games to be published. Then the third thing that we did was our teaching studio. So through our teaching studio, we partner with studios and create outsourced work agreements so that our students can contribute to live games or games in production and gain that practical experience, that on-the-job experience. And as an example, in 2019, we ran a game dev bootcamp through which students had the opportunity to contribute to early prototypes for Glow Up Games' Insecure, the Come Up game with HBO. The students were credited for their contribution, and it was designed so that those who had other responsibilities, such as caregiving or parental leave, could keep their skills and credits fresh and up to date, and also give the opportunity for studios to upskill their staff and to help indie developers get to market quicker by having mechanics prototyped for them with this cohort. So yeah, I know that was a ton of information. We're trying to change the industry at all levels through this approach. 2020 alone, we had over 100 underrepresented game developers come through our program. And I just ask you to remember those statistics about what the majority does look like in the industry right now. There were developers from over 15 countries, and they had the access to a strong mentor network of over 150 developers who were allies. And we paid out over $110,000 in stipends to be able to fund these creators through the generosity of our sponsors, and granted over $25,000 in scholarships for our Intro to Game Making program. So this is a bit of the more hard-hitting stuff. Sure, we just make games, and our games don't save lives, but the opportunities that come with making them do. Marginalized developers are even more so impacted by global crisis, yet the games industry is thriving. There is no excuse in my mind. Opening these doors has a ripple effect, so I'd really like to do it intentionally. I'd like to thank Counterpoints, Art, and Okra for the opportunity. There are so many stories out there to be told, stories and experiences that shift the lens, as you can see from it's already happened in other media. So we need to get marginalized voices in the room, and we want to enable those voices and provide opportunities at all levels. So please join us in creating this ripple effect. We're going to be holding more courses in the year and more opportunities. So please don't hesitate to get in touch, collaborate. We'll help move the needle. We'll think outside of the box. It's going to be excellent. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Tara. That was incredible. I just feel endlessly inspired. I think, I think about myself as a young kid playing video games and, desperately wanting something like this and paying it forward. And then, the ripple effect is eventually I'll start seeing more people like me in games, which, thank you so much for your work. Thanks a lot. Incredible session. There will be an opportunity, hopefully, for questions later on, just after our panel. So if you do have questions, please save them for later. Right now, we will hear from August Aiden Black, the voice behind Tyler Ronan, the main protagonist of Tell Me Why, an interactive narrative game. His video will discuss his experience as a trans man and how that helped shape the first game that featured a trans male lead. I should actually note that it's the first trans male lead in a major AAA title. So if we have that good to go, I will hand off.
Just to say, there's been a slight change of the program. August is actually doing a workshop with us later on, so if you're interested in that, please go. I think it's from 1:30 to 2:30. So actually, we have Marjana, who's going to come and talk to us about queer in gaming. So
no worries.
Well.
Hi everyone, can you hear me? Great. Yes, so I'm not August. I'm Marjana. I'm a writer and communication strategist, and also a gamer. I'm London-based, but I grew up in Chicago's Polish community, and my pronouns are they, them, and sometimes she, her. I'm also going to share my screen right now. Let's see. Great. Perfect. So in this presentation on queer in gaming and LGBTQ representation, I'll share a lot of different quotes from a report that I co-wrote and released actually this Wednesday with Alice Sachraida, titled New Brave World, The Power, Opportunity, and Potential of Pop Culture in the UK. In it, we talked to a lot of creatives, a lot of folks in the games industry, a lot of people who spoke to us about experiences as queer and trans game designers. So in this presentation, I'm kind of framing it in three acts. Act one, which is the fact that video games have always been queer. And I want to emphasize this because the LGBTQ Games Archive, founded by Dr. Adrian Shaw in the US, has this incredible master list of more than 1,200 games that feature LGBTQ plus content from the 1970s all the way until present day. As Adrian Shaw told me, the archive shows that LGBTQ plus people and stories have been a part of games for as long as games have existed. We often talk about getting kind of a queer trans character in a mainstream game as somehow novel and groundbreaking. But actually, there have been so many examples of small games from the very beginning that have included queer and trans protagonists. It's just the history is not very good, and I know that the LGBTQ Games Archive has sort of struggled to even put the time into playing all of the games from the past and kind of logging different characters and storylines. But I think this in large part matters, the history aspect of it, because it means that having a queer trans character isn't something that developers or publishers should perceive as somehow risky, right? It's normal, and it's been part of the history of this medium for a very long time. Now, history aside, we can look to the present moment, I think, as a queer renaissance of sorts, which is something that a lot of people I've talked to in the industry have acknowledged. Major publishers are investing in a lot of immersive blockbuster games that develop kind of multi-dimensional characters, ones who are queer or trans or Black or Muslim and are resisting tired tropes. So I'm just sharing a couple of examples here, like, The Last of Us Part 2, which has Ellie, young queer woman surviving in the post-apocalyptic US. It also has Lev in Part 2, who's a young trans man. Borderlands 3, not too long ago, released an expansion pack called Guns, Love, and Tentacles, which features, I think, what is the first major gay marriage storyline. And then also, of course, a lot of indies. Dream Daddy is kind of a fantastic small game that's basically a dad dating simulator. Niche, but absolutely phenomenal. But mainstream games aside, I think one thing to emphasize is that indie development studios and many who have representatives in the room here today, while they've grappled with diversity, have long led the charge on taking more narrative risks. And I think this quote from Robin Gray, who founded Gaming Magazine, sort of encapsulates this, which is the fact that queer storylines in indie games have actually put positive pressure on AAA companies, basically like creating this level of self-permission, that it's actually okay to have protagonists who are women, who are people of color, who are multidimensional, who are queer and trans. It could still mean that you will, make money off of these games, and they will be complex and interesting for your audiences, which are quite diverse. But I think the second part of Robin's quote is also really important, that publishers need to invest in developers who are kind of including equality and diversity policies from the very beginning into the DNA of their companies. This in large part is queer because representation in games is not removed from the people who make them, right? And make them under what conditions. I think it's relevant to note that in 2020, UKI, the Games Industry Trade Association, published the first census assessing diversity in games, and specifically the games workforce. And it found some staggering statistics, many that people in the games industry have known for a long time, which is that there's still severe underrepresentation of women and people of color. A third of workers report suffering anxiety and depression, long crunch periods, right, extreme amounts of overtime, which, this anxiety and depression jumps to over 50% among trans people working in the industry. But one positive being that LGBTQ representation actually was much higher than in other sectors. So back to sort of looking at representation, right? Kind of going back to what Adrian Shaw has kind of emphasized with the LGBTQ Games Archive, we need to sort of recognize that there will never be a perfect queer or trans character or a Muslim protagonist or a Black superhero that is just kind of ideal, right? There's never going to be an ideal storyline that tackles racism and suddenly uproots transphobia in a single go. Yet there remains immense pressure on characters who are underrepresented, and by extension, the creators who develop them, to achieve this sort of level of perfection. This pressure in part comes from the fact that there are so few nuanced and multidimensional representations of marginalized people and communities, even though headway, of course, has been made. So, as this quote kind of reveals, like, we need to have representation, but not put the pressure on characters to speak for the entire community. What we should actually be striving towards is an abundance of representation, right? So this includes nuanced characters, multidimensional storylines. It means really, really spectacular open world games, but it means also mediocre ones and small ones where being queer or trans is kind of just normal. And actually, Robin Gray has emphasized this too in interviews I've done with him, where, small gestures and mundane forms of representation could actually be the most powerful ones and the most powerful in normalizing diversity. And I love this example of the game from the game Football Manager, which I had no idea about. I had never played it before, but in it, apparently, if you keep a queer player on your roster, in your football roster, it actually makes your merchandise value go up. And then if you keep them in there, you'll get a little rainbow flag in sort of the stands. And it's sort of a small way to incentivize gamers to kind of keep queer football players on their roster, which I think is really interesting. And I think to emphasize that this could work, like, we've seen it happen in so many different other mediums that aren't just gaming. For example, She-Ra, which is a breakout series about friendship, love, and really amazing superhero princesses, weaves LGBTQ plus identity through the entire narrative, creating space for queer and trans voice actors. But as this sort of quote from The Guardian notes, that queer and trans identity in She-Ra it's just kind of part of the experience. It's part of the story without having to be entirely about it, right? So there are different body shapes, there are different ethnicities, ways that characters interact with each other and have relationships, but ultimately it's not a main driver for the drama. So just to very, very briefly wrap up, since I know we have a lot of funders in the room, I'd like to make a couple of suggestions of maybe places where we could look for greater investment. So first is don't just invest in games, invest in communities. One game that gets representation right or tackles a social justice issue is probably not going to change the world, but investing in gamer communities and communities that game just might. So, the advent of social media platforms has really blurred the lines of consumer and creator. And we could see this with viewership on YouTube and Twitch, where gamers stream themselves playing games. And this has skyrocketed, especially among young audiences. And, there are countless of streamers who are kind of building queer and diverse communities around them in spaces that are really welcoming. the trans streamer, for example, A Quarter Ghost, who's a part of Rainbow Arcade, kind of does chill vibes on their stream, but also raises money for charity. Black Girl Gamers, which is the image here, is another powerhouse team of streamers that create safe and online spaces for Black women in gaming. These are really interesting spaces for philanthropy to look to invest in. The second place is bringing in people with lived experience. So at the end of the day, it's pretty simple. We're going to get more captivating and interesting representations in games if people with those lived experiences are actually shaping the process. Solo developers, indie studios, and AAAs all rely in some form on consultants or people on the inside who are shaping character development, providing feedback on scripts, and reviewing game demos. Funders can really help fill a gap here, especially for indie studios that might not have big budgets to invest in diversity consultants. And I think these two quotes here kind of hit home the point. Spider-Man Miles Morales was such a phenomenal game, so nuanced, so deep, had so many different kinds of characters. And it was possible not only because they had consultants, but because they had a Black writer with deep experience in the games and comic book industry, as Chella from Puck and Plain. And then the last bit, I think, and I'm so honored to have been able to speak after Tara from Code Coven, but the reality is that so many organizations exist that are straddling the worlds of gaming and social justice. When my co-author Alice and I started working on Brave New World, I had no idea how many interviews and conversations I would end up having with people pushing for change from both the inside out, but also the outside in, putting pressure on the games industry. So this is just a short list, and the report includes so many more organizations. But these are organizations that are doing the work and are looking for support and investment. So I'd kind of lift that up to philanthropy. And just last slide of this presentation is that August Aiden Black will in fact be speaking. I did not replace him. At 1:30 p.m. In The Power of a Voice, the making of Tell Me Why. And again, in this presentation, he will discuss his experiences as a trans person helping shape the first video game from a major developer featuring a lead trans character, which is Tell Me Why. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for that, and I apologize for the mix up there, but that was amazing. So right now we actually have a panel featuring you, Marjana, and consisting of Tara and Mal, who we heard from earlier on. We'll be introducing one extra panelist, Carla Reyes, also from Code Coven. She'll be joining us as well. Hello, Carla.
Hi. Are you able to hear me?
Also. Yes, I can hear you loud and clear. If you could just introduce yourself very quickly for everybody as you've just joined us now.
Sure, of course. So I'm Carla Reyes. I'm a product manager at Square Enix, and I'm also head of business development at Code Coven, and I also volunteer for Bayman Games, so really trying to do a lot of advocacy work across the industry, both through my work at Square Enix and with Code Coven and Bayman Games.
Awesome stuff. So I'm assuming Tara and Mal are here as well. They've just been hanging around in the background. Yeah. There they are, lovely faces. So this panel will be looking at the wider games industry landscape, exploring the opportunities around telling more diverse stories. So firstly, and each question will be to the entire lineup. Please feel free to jump in. What do you see as the opportunities within the games industry? What developments are you excited by? Because the possibilities and opportunities are almost feels endless at this point. Who wants to go first?
Yeah, I can jump in and just talk about, when you say opportunities, do you mean in relation to diversity and inclusion, or more generally, more broadly?
More generally, more broadly, but also, we can go quite direct and talk about the diversity element of it.
Yeah, so I guess from a broad perspective, it's very exciting because there's obviously a lot of rapid technological advancement that's being experimented with, and I think we're still not fully certain as a consumer base of what the possibilities are, because everything is sort of in stealth mode, but that's definitely really interesting. From a D&I perspective, I think 2020 was a really critical year because of the resurgence of social justice movements, not just Black Lives Matter, but also the games industry had its own Me Too movement. And I think that there has been a lot more willingness from the industry to listen and respond swiftly and take direct action. And we'll probably dig into that a little bit later. But, even just things like representation and being able to make changes to be able to more authentically portray characters. And I know that's been a theme throughout, but it's just 2 cents.
Totally. Did anyone else want to weigh in? Mal, do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, I think there's going to be just more opportunity, more demand and opportunity in terms of diverse people trying to create interesting content, tell their own stories. And naturally, the demand for that, I think, the demand's already there. And I think the funders, the publishers, etc., they're going to be more aware to that. I think Marina's approach in terms of like kind of focusing on the community, the process, rather than individual projects is really important. I think there has to be this kind of shift over time. And I mean, as a gamer, that's great. If I get to experience more unique stories, that's awesome. I want that. I want to learn more about different people, different situations, different identities. I find that interesting, quite frankly. So I think it's...
Did he freeze? I think he might have frozen. Joys of doing internet stuff. It's totally fine. I would have loved to have heard what his last point was. I was on like tenterhooks. So, we've kind of touched on this previously from like different talks, and even you, Marjana, mentioned this. What are the challenges you see now as needing to be addressed in order to build on the work that has been started? I think a good point is like, talking about the teams, like the actual makeup of who is making these games. I'd love to know your further thoughts on that.
Yeah, I mean, gosh, yeah, it's a big topic because I think what I've been worried about happening, and I think a lot of people, including Carla, who we interviewed for the report, a lot of people we talked to are kind of in the aftermath of the recent wave of Black Lives Matter uprisings last year. Is how do we cement this moment, right? So there was a flood of from video game companies to major broadcasting institutions in the UK and in the US, so many people came out with press statements, right? Like, we need greater diversity. We need to put more investment into inclusion efforts internally. The question is, what is it going to take to actually cement these efforts so that it turns into change that's lasting, right? As opposed to kind of tokenizing, checking of diversity boxes. And I think, as representation is important, but also the conditions in which people are working are important as well. My background is actually in labor rights. And so I'm wondering, what does it look like for us to build companies in the entertainment industry that are kind of inclusive and embody values from the very beginning, right? That say, what, we're going to make an open world game that's 30 hours instead of 80 hours because we don't want to run our team into the ground. And I think all of these elements are connected, and neither one exists in isolation.
Yeah, I fully echo what Marjan has just described. I think coming from, my AAA experience with Square Enix, it's definitely challenging to be working at a large organization that already has systems and processes in place, but we are starting to do the work. I know, just to speak from my team's perspective, with what we're doing is we're working closely with HR, and actually many employee resource groups have emerged. We co-founded a group called RED, which is focused on racial and ethnic diversity last year, and that group has really played a critical role, not just in supporting the recruitment efforts, but also in providing that sensitivity consultation that Marjana alluded to earlier, from Chella's comment about we're seeing that more development teams are willing to reach out to people who would be able to provide a lens. And that can be exhausting. Of course, I know that, being somebody from an underrepresented background, you don't fully want to rely on, your internal resources. Hopefully you would then get the developers on the team who can provide that perspective. But I think there should be knowledge sharing across the industry overall. I think standards and criteria are also important. One of the things that was mentioned in the report is So the BFI and BAFTA have diversity and inclusion standards, and what we're trying to create at Square Enix are similar criteria for our greenlight process and due diligence processes, so that a project will not be greenlit unless it actually meets these diversity standards. And this is the only way that you can really have that type of systemic change.
Just because you mentioned it, Marjana, it's kind of in the forefront of my mind. I think the labour practices are really important. That's something I'm quite passionate about. For those of you in the audience who aren't aware, crunch is, when workers are forced to meet incredibly tough deadlines in a very short amount of time. Are there any is there anything in place? We've got kind of diversity criteria, but is there anything really for crunch in that aspect? That's a broad question. I don't actually know, but I'd be curious to find out.
Well, I know that in the US, I think, more recently, Game Workers Unite did end up making efforts in the UK to help unionize game workers. So, collective bargaining, when people get together to kind of set the conditions in which they'll work. I think that's one positive step, right? What can you put in place to help workers come together, regardless of the industry, to make the case for better conditions? And I think Game Workers Unite started unionizing in the UK a couple of years ago. I'll dig up some good articles and send them along in the chat.
Wicked, that'd be awesome. So representation is something that we've kind of touched on in general, and you kind of spoke about this in your talk, but is that something that should only fall to marginalized people, or do those in power and those most represented have the responsibility to tell different stories?
Should I jump in on that? Yeah, thank you. I think really, to be very frank with you, it's exhausting to expect unrepresented minorities and identities to have to constantly shout about themselves, because I'm actually I'm quite an introvert at times, and so sometimes I just don't want to go around shouting to the world that I'm this, I'm that, please see me. But at the same time, I've come to realize actually sometimes if I don't use my voice, assumptions are made, negative assumptions can be made quite easily. But to answer your point directly, I think it's a shared responsibility across society. I don't think it's down to the individual person who's marginalized. I think that's very unfair. But I think the reality is quite often is that it is the individual who's marginalized who has to take that first step, highlight, find other people like them, to start that process. But I think collectively as a society, if we see anyone who is in that situation, we should do our best to collectively empower them and anyone else. And hopefully there will be more initiatives, there'll be more policy that will come through that will help this.
Absolutely. And I know we've been quite critical, and I think that's a good thing. There's nothing wrong with being critical and holding things accountable. But just for some, kind of lighthearted, positive examples as we round off the panel, what games have you been struck by in terms of great representation? I know we got some titles before, like The Last of Us Part 2, but are there any ones that people should go and check out?
I loved. From a AAA, in the indie space, there's lots of amazing examples. From a AAA perspective, Horizon Zero Dawn, I thought that from a narrative point of view, it tackled a diverse cast incredibly well, and I just found it quite welcoming and embracing. And I realized by playing it and enjoying it, I was actually, this is quite nice. I'm not questioning why it's a white dude that's the lead and the kind of Western driven narratives that we normally get. It's not perfect, but it's a great step in that direction.
I mean, I've absolutely loved playing Watchdogs Legion on the PS5 because it's not perfect, but the kind of open world experience and how diverse London feels, like it's just incredible. So many different stories. You get to talk to characters on the street, not to mention how just the gorgeous level of detail in kind of buildings and streets. One thing I was like, kind of in my open world car driving through Soho, and I'm like, why is there not a single gay bar on any of these corners? And so, you know, I think the opportunities with games are absolutely limitless. And I think the thing that I'm most excited about is seeing crossovers between entertainment mediums. So what we've seen with like the Marvel Cinematic Universe, the kind of new golden age of superhero stories, from comic books transitioning to Netflix dramas to like the incredible world experience in cinema, and it bleeds into the games industry. So I'm just thinking, like, you know, I watched Small Axe and It's a Sin, which feel like these really tangible historical reckoning moments for TV and for the entertainment industry and just in general British history. What would that look like in a game format? Like, can we, like, what's the narrative design element of It's a Sin to like really talk about LGBTQ history and liberation? So I feel really, really optimistic about what's to come.
And I feel like, were you gonna weigh in?
Oh no, I was just going to add a series of titles that I appreciate, which probably
please go for it.
But, no, Life is Strange, I think for me was quite poignant from a narrative perspective, and going back to what Tara was mentioning earlier about being able to empathize and, you know, playing that character. That was always good.
Wicked stuff. Yeah, I think as I said, a real sense of hope, and like, yeah, I'd love to see what the narrative games equivalent of It's a Sin is, like really exploring that part of like LGBT history. And yeah, there are a wealth of stories to tap into, which makes me very, very hopeful. So on that note, thank you so much to my incredible panelists. I think there is the opportunity to ask some questions in the chat. So if there's anything burning a hole in your mind, please go ahead and do that. So we've got a 10-minute break coming up, but while you're chilling out, you can watch and or play along with the short game, The Night Fisherman. Introducing the game is creator Anthony Default. It is all yours.
Hello, thanks for having me. I don't feel as qualified as everyone else to be here. I just made a game in anger and it set some people off on the internet. So I'm Anthony Default. I'm a narrative designer, writer and programmer. I'm also a narrative design columnist for Wireframe magazine. The game that I'm going to be talking about today is roughly 6 or 7 minutes long, so long enough to play in this break if you'd like, and I'm just putting some links to it in the chat there, but I'll also be playing it on screen. There's some content warnings for racism and off-screen violence. The game's called The Night Fisherman, and I just wanted to talk very briefly before I play it on stream about the game's context, because I think it is heavily linked to why it became a success. So it was made exhausted at the end of a rapid prototyping period and entirely completed within 1 week. It was made in anger. In the days prior to it, Home Secretary Priti Patel had tweeted an image and emblazoned against a Union Jack the words, "We're ending free movement." Were present, and she described this as like a once and for all moment. And we were tired, we were rapid prototyping, we decided to make a game that was basically a big FU to that sentiment. Coincidentally, Union Jacks had been springing up all around where I lived in Middle England. A dangerous drunk man had kept us all awake one night yelling in the street about how minorities were going to get kicked out. I'd lost the entire paternal side of my family to racism so extreme they'd started describing Hitler as admirable. And this is the backdrop that we made The Night Fisherman against. So I will also wanted to say beforehand that although BIPOC and refugees have since supported the game, the focus here is not on diversity or inclusion, but on fostering anti-racism amongst white people. It was really made for ourselves. It was for white people witnessing and feeling unable to do anything about the rapid decline that we were seeing in Middle England. And personally, I was radicalized into racism for a time as a young teenager and made this game because works like it were the ones that shook those convictions and brought me out of it. Anyway, The game's an interactive recontextualization of one of the best scenes in modern cinema, and I won't mention which here because it would spoil it, but you can readily find it online in this discussion of the game. Any articles about the Night Fisherman generally mention it. So fingers crossed screen recording works. If it doesn't, the links are there. You can play the game for yourself. Let's give this a go. So screen share, this one. And I'm hoping it shares audio as well. Can I change my mic? Give me thumbs up in the chat if you can hear the game when it starts playing, when it gets past the...
It seems like we're having some technical... Oh wait, what's going on? Have we taken a break? What's... Oh. Okay, are you in this session?
I am. As far
Connecting.
Okay, good to go. Sorry, everyone. We just had some technical blips.
Cool. I believe we're back. So...
Hi, Anthony. I'm so sorry, everyone. We're going to have to cut it off there. It was very calming from my end. What's going to happen now, everyone, is that we're going to move into a next session. So we're going to end this and then start a next session new. So please go to your session tab and meet us.